A billionaire CEO stood up in front of 300 of the richest people in the entire state and swore out loud that she would only ever marry the man her little boy chose. It was supposed to be impossible, and that was the entire point of saying it. Her son hadn't spoken a single full sentence to another living soul in over a year and a half, not since the day his father died. He wasn't going to choose anybody. He couldn't. The vow was a locked door, and everyone in her life understood it was a locked door, and that was exactly why she'd made it. Then that silent 6-year-old climbed down off the stage all on his own, and he walked right past a ballroom full of millionaires in their $1,000 suits, past every powerful, polished, perfectly eligible man in that entire room, and he crossed all the way to the very back, to the service doors, to where the help was standing. And he reached up, and he took my hand, the school bus driver's hand, the one man in that whole gleaming room that not a single important person had so much as glanced at all night long. And 300 of the most powerful people in the state slowly turned around to stare at me. And what I did in the 30 seconds after that was the one single thing that nobody in that ballroom saw coming, least of all the boy's mother. But before I tell you what I did, do me one quick favor. If you have ever been the person standing at the back of the room that nobody important ever once bothered to actually see, hit that subscribe button right now. This whole channel is built for the people the world looks straight past without a second thought. Go on, I'll wait. Then let me back all the way up, because to understand why that little boy crossed an entire ballroom to find me, you first have to understand a very quiet kid, and an empty seat at his kitchen table, and about 18 months of ordinary mornings on a school bus. My name is Theo Marsh. I'm 39 years old, and I drive a school bus for a living. Route 12. Every single morning and every single afternoon. The same 40-odd kids, the same stops, the same streets, rain or shine or snow, for the last 6 years running. It is not a job that any child grows up dreaming about, and it is most certainly not a job that gets you a second glance at a fancy party full of donors. But I am going to tell you something true that took me a good long while to understand for myself. A school bus driver sees things. You are the very first adult those children lay eyes on every morning who isn't their own parent, and you are the last adult they see every afternoon before they walk back through their own front doors. And after a while, you learn to read a kid's entire day right off their face in the half-second it takes them to climb up your steps. You see the ones who are loved, and, God help you, you see the ones who aren't. You see the good mornings, and you see the bad ones. You see which kid didn't eat, and which kid didn't sleep, and which kid is carrying something no 6-year-old should have to carry. 40 kids, twice a day, 6 years running. You see absolutely everything, if you only bother to look. And the thing is, most people never bother to look. That, right there, is the whole story, really. Everything else is just details. I'm a single dad. My daughter's name is Lily, she's 7 years old, and she is the entire reason I took a school bus route in the first place. The hours line up exactly with hers, so I'm home when she's home, and I've never once missed a school play or a bad dream or a scraped knee. Her mother and I split up when Lily was very small. It was the amicable kind, the kind with no villain in the story. Her mom is a genuinely good woman who lives a couple of hours away now, and Lily splits her time between us. And I will tell you with my whole heart that the weeks I have, my girl, are the best weeks there are. So that's me, in one breath. A man who drives a bus specifically so that he can be there for his own kid, who sees 40 other people's kids twice a day, and who made his peace a long time ago with being completely invisible to anyone whose paycheck happens to have more digits on it than his. And then, about a year and a half ago, there was Sam. Sam Frost got added to my route on an ordinary gray Monday, 6 years old, and he was, without any competition at all, the single, quietest child I have ever had on my bus in all my years of driving it. And I want to be clear, because it matters. It was not shy quiet. It was not well-behaved quiet. It was something else entirely. It was a heavy quiet, a quiet that sat down on top of that little boy like a winter coat 3 sizes too big for him, a quiet he seemed to be carrying rather than choosing. He would climb up my steps every morning without a single word, and he'd go straight to the same seat, third row back, on the right-hand side, hard against the window, and he would just look out of that window for the entire ride. Every single day, like he was watching the streets go by for something that he already knew, deep down, was never going to come. I learned his story the way that bus drivers always end up learning these things, sideways in pieces, a little from the other parents at the stops, a little from the aides at the school. Sam's father had died. Suddenly, an accident, back when Sam was about 4.5 years old. And Sam, who by every account had been a complete chatterbox before that day, a bright and loud and funny little firecracker of a kid, had simply gone quiet afterward. Shut right down, stopped talking almost entirely to almost everyone. I came to understand that the doctors and specialists had a clinical name for it. Selective mutism, they called it, brought on by the trauma of the loss, but I'll be honest with you, words like that don't tell you one true thing about the reality of a 6-year-old boy looking out of a bus window for 1.5 years straight. His mother, I gathered from the whispers, was somebody very important, somebody with a truly enormous amount of money, and she had every specialist and therapist and expert that money could possibly buy working on her silent son around the clock, and not one bit of it was working. Sam just kept right on looking out that window. Now, here is the thing, and it is honestly the only thing in this entire story that actually matters, so I need you to hear it. I did not try to fix Sam, because everybody else in that little boy's life was trying to fix him. The therapists, the tutors, the specialists, his frightened mother, every last one of them was coming at that child with that anxious, hovering, grown-up energy of, "Please, please, sweetheart, just be okay, just say something, just talk to us, you're frightening us." And a kid feels that. A kid feels it in his bones. A kid feels every waking minute like he is a problem that the adults around him are desperate to solve. So I simply did not do that. I never once did that. Instead, I just saw him. Every single morning when Sam climbed up my steps, I would say, "Morning, Sam, good to see you." That was it. Not, "How are you feeling today?" Not, "Are you going to talk for me today, buddy?" Not one single thing that required him to produce an answer or perform a recovery. Just, "I see you. You exist. You matter to me. Go on and find your seat." And every single afternoon when he climbed back on to go home, I'd say, "There he is. Climb aboard, partner." And that was the entire extent of it. That is genuinely all I did, for 1.5 years. I just treated that silent little boy exactly like he was a regular kid, because he was a regular kid who happened to be carrying a thing that was far too heavy for him, and the very last thing on this earth that he needed was one more anxious adult making a project out of his broken heart. And little things grew up out of that slowly, the way that real things always do. I started to notice what Sam noticed out of his window. And the one thing that made him perk up, just barely, just a fraction, every single day was a particular yard over on Maple Street, where there lived a big old, happy golden retriever who came galloping down to the fence to watch the bus go by. So I started slowing down a little there. Every day, right at that yard, I'd ease off and let the bus roll slow, so that Sam could get a good long look at that dog. I never said one word about it. I never made it a thing. I just slowed down. And then one day, a few months into all of this, as he was climbing down off the bus, Sam stopped dead on the bottom step. And he pointed back at the dog's yard. And he looked up at me. He didn't say a single word, but he looked right up into my face, and there was a whole entire question living in that look. "You see him too? You slow down on purpose?" And I just said, easy as anything, "Yeah, good dog, huh? I look for him every day, same as you." And Sam nodded. One small, solemn nod. And that, right there, was the very first time that little boy and I ever truly talked to one another, and not one single word was spoken out loud between us. And that is exactly how it went. From there, months and months of it. The smallest, slowest, most patient building of a thing in the world, between one grieving little boy and the bus driver who slowed down for his dog. He started saving up a wave for me from his front door in the mornings. He drew me a picture once, a yellow school bus and a brown dog, side by side, and he handed it to me folded up into a tiny little square, and then looked the other way, out the window, while I unfolded it, like he couldn't bear to watch me see it. I taped it up to my sun visor that very afternoon, and I want you to know it is still taped there to this day. He never did say very much out loud, not for a long, long time, but somewhere inside those 18 months, on a school bus of all the places in the world, that grieving little boy quietly made up his mind that I was safe, that I was his. I didn't fully grasp it at the time, I'll admit. I just knew that I'd come to love that quiet kid in the third row more than I could rightly explain, and that the single best part of my entire morning had become Morning Sam, and getting that one small solemn nod in return. I want to be clear about one more thing, because it bears on everything that came after. I did not know Sam's mother from a complete stranger on the street. I had never once met the woman. The morning drop-offs and the afternoon pickups were always handled by a nanny, a kind, soft-spoken woman named Pilar, who I'd come to know a little. I knew, of course, that Sam came from real money. You could read it easily enough. The quality of his little clothes, the address of his stop, the fact of a full-time nanny. But I had absolutely no idea how much money, and more to the point, it had genuinely never once crossed my mind to care about it. He wasn't a rich kid to me, he was just Sam. He was the boy who loved the dog on Maple, which is precisely what makes the thing that happened next so strange that, even now, all this time later, I still find myself shaking my head about it. It was the school district's big annual charity gala. Now, ordinarily, an event like that has exactly nothing to do with a man who drives a school bus. But the district had recently started up this tradition of having a handful of staff members from each individual school attend the thing, a few teachers, a couple of aides, and, yes, one bus driver, drawn by simple lottery, as a kind of warm gesture, celebrating the whole school family, all of that. And, as my luck would have it, my name got pulled out of the hat. And I very nearly didn't go at all. A glittering ballroom full of wealthy donors is just about my least favorite imaginable way to spend an evening, and on top of that I'd have to find somebody to watch Lily for the night. But the principal, a decent woman, made it sound like it genuinely mattered, like the staff being seen there meant something real to the school. So in the end I went down and rented the one and only suit I have ever rented in my life, and I went. And my entire plan, start to finish, was to stand quietly at the back of the room near the doors, eat a few of those tiny, pointless, fork-defying appetizers, smile politely at nobody in particular, and then slip out the very second it was polite enough to do so. What I did not know, what not one single person had thought to mention to the bus driver, was that the gala's single biggest donor that year, the woman whose name was printed on half the evening's program, the CEO whose company was personally funding the entire new wing of the school, was a woman named Adeline Frost, Sam's mother. And there was a great deal more that I didn't know. Besides, I did not know that Adeline Frost had spent that entire year and a half as the target of what I can only really describe, looking back on it, as a slow-motion siege. Because a young, beautiful, brilliant, and newly widowed billionaire is, as it turns out, very nearly the most hunted creature walking the face of the earth. Every ambitious man in 3 states had been quietly circling her ever since her husband died. And I mean a very particular kind of man. The kind who looks at a grieving woman with an enormous fortune and a small fatherless boy at her side, and who does not see a grieving woman at all, but instead smells a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They befriended her, they maneuvered, and, worst of all, they befriended Sam. Clumsily, transparently, with all the grace of a brick. They bought that silent little boy expensive gifts he had no interest in. They ruffled his hair and called him Champ. They performed being wonderful with children, loudly, whenever his mother happened to be watching, and ignored him completely the instant she wasn't. And Sam, who did not speak, but who saw absolutely everything, who had nothing to do all day but watch and listen and notice, Sam despised it. Of course he did. Children always know. Children are the finest lie detectors that God ever built. They can smell a performance from across a room, and they never, ever forget who was real with them and who was only acting. And Adeline, worn down to absolutely nothing by all of it, by the grief and the loneliness and the endless circling siege of it had at some point said a thing. Half in genuine earnest and half, I think, simply to make the circling men finally give up and go away. She had said it to her family and to her board of directors, and even pointedly to the suitors themselves, and somewhere along the line it had hardened into a known and settled fact about her. Adelaine Frost would not so much as consider marrying again, not for any reason, unless it was to a man that her son chose for himself. Her son. The boy who did not speak. The boy who wanted absolutely nothing to do with any single one of them. It was, as every soul in her orbit perfectly understood, simply her elegant and unanswerable way of saying never. It was a locked door with the key thrown into the sea. Because the only person alive who could ever turn that particular lock had gone completely silent a year and a half before, and showed no earthly sign of ever turning it for anyone. So I need you to picture that gala now. Picture the CEO up near the front, near the stage, gracious, composed, exhausted to her very bones underneath the gown and the smile, and orbited, the whole night long, by exactly the sort of polished, wealthy, eligible men I've been describing to you, each one taking his careful turn at her side, each one with half an eye on her and the other half an eye trained on the silent little boy in the miniature blazer standing close against her leg, each man performing warmth and fatherliness at that child for his mother's benefit. And then, all the way at the other end of that enormous room, picture me, standing at the very back by the service doors, holding a tiny plate with something unidentifiable on it, my rented collar too tight, quietly counting down the minutes in my head until it would be decent enough for me to go home to my daughter. And now, picture Sam, standing there beside his mother in a vast room full of glittering strangers who every single one of them wanted something from her. Watching man after man after man crouch down to his level and aim a great big fake smile at him and call him buddy and little man and champ. That heavy 3 sizes too big coat of quiet sitting on his small shoulders, 6 years old in the middle of all of it, and completely, utterly alone. I didn't even know the boy was in the building until I heard the whole room change. You know the way a room sounds when something is suddenly happening in it, the way the hum of 300 conversations drops all at once, the way heads start to turn in a wave. I looked up from my sad little plate, and the entire ballroom had gone quiet and was turning to look at something out on the floor, and the something that they were all looking at was a little boy, walking. Sam had stepped away from his mother. Away from the stage, away from the ring of important circling men, away from all of it. And he was walking, entirely by himself, straight across that enormous polished ballroom floor, with 300 of the most powerful people in the state watching him do it, in a single, straight and certain line. It took me an embarrassingly long few seconds to understand that he was walking toward me. I genuinely, actually turned and looked behind myself to see who he must really be aiming for, but there was no one standing behind me at all. There was just me and the service doors and a tray of dirty glasses. Sam walked the entire length of that ballroom, past every last millionaire in it, past every powerful man who'd spent a year and a half performing for his mother. And he came to a stop directly in front of me, and he tipped his head all the way back to look up at me with those serious, solemn brown eyes, and he reached his small hand up, and he took hold of mine. And then, and this is the precise moment that put a crack straight through the middle of that entire silent, glittering room, he said out loud, in a clear, certain little voice that the vast majority of the people in that ballroom had quite simply never once heard him use in their lives. "This is my friend. He sees the dog with me." I have never, before or since, felt anything in my life remotely like what I felt standing there in that 1 second. Because I knew exactly what those 7 words had cost that little boy. I knew that I was listening to a year and a half of total silence break wide open in a room full of frightening strangers, for me, for the bus driver. Because the bus driver slowed down for a dog on Maple Street and never asked for one single thing in return. And then I looked up past the top of Sam's head, and Adelaine Frost was standing just a few feet away from us. She had followed her son all the way across that room, and she had both of her hands pressed hard over her mouth, and the tears were just pouring down her face, openly, in front of everyone, because she was hearing her little boy's voice out loud in public for the very first time since the day her husband died. And then, into that ringing crystal silence, with 300 of the most powerful people in the state holding their breath and watching, somebody up near the stage, and I do believe it was meant kindly, but Lord above, somebody called out, in a bright voice that carried to every corner of that room, "Well, Adeline, it would appear that your son has finally chosen." And the whole room laughed, warm and delighted, and charmed right down to their shoes. And as one single creature, 300 people turned to look at me, the rumpled, tight-collared bus driver in his rented suit, standing by the dirty glasses, holding a billionaire's son by the hand. And in that instant I understood, with a cold horror that started at my scalp and went straight down to my feet, exactly what was happening. The vow. Every soul in that room knew about the vow. She would marry the man her son chose, and her son had just, in the most public way imaginable, in front of everyone who mattered, chosen me. And here, right here, is the place where I did the one thing that not a single person in that entire ballroom ever saw coming. Every man in that room, I have absolutely no doubt, would have seized it with both hands. The very gates of heaven swinging wide open without warning. A beautiful, kind, brilliant, fabulously wealthy woman, and a famous public vow, and an adored child's open choice, all of it handed to you at once, gift-wrapped, in front of 300 witnesses. You would have to be a stone-cold fool to fumble a thing like that. So I do truly understand why every person in that room fully expected me to smile, and to step forward, and to play my appointed part in the beautiful fairy tale that had just written itself. Instead, I let go of Sam's hand, gently, so gently, and I knelt all the way down until I was right at his eye level, with my back turned to all of those hundreds of staring, smiling people, so that it was just him and me, the way it always was on the bus in the mornings. And I said to him, very quietly, just for him and nobody else, "Sam, that right there is the bravest thing I have ever seen anybody do in my whole life. Thank you for telling all these people that we're friends, because we are friends, and we are always, always going to be friends." And then I stood back up, and I looked Adeline Frost directly in the eye, and I said, and this time I said it loud enough for the whole room to hear me clearly, because the whole room was exactly who needed to hear it. "Ma'am, your boy is the finest kid on my entire route, and it has been the great honor of my year to be the man who drives his bus. But I need to say this part out loud so that everybody in here hears it, said plain. I am not anybody's prize to be won, and this boy is not a key to a lock. Your son did not choose a husband for you here tonight. He chose a friend for himself. That is all that he did, and it is a pure and a beautiful thing, and I will not stand here and let it get twisted into something else right in front of him." And I looked back down at Sam, and I smiled at him. Friends don't need a reason, partner, and they sure don't need a reward. I'll see you Monday morning. I'll slow down for the dog. And then I picked my coat up off the chair, and I walked out of that ballroom, and I drove home to my daughter. Because that little boy had just done the bravest and the purest thing I had ever witnessed a human being do. He had reached straight past an entire room full of polished phonies to publicly claim the one single adult who had ever just let him be exactly who he was. And I would sooner have died right there on that ballroom floor than allow a crowd of glittering strangers to turn that holy thing into a cheap punchline about marrying his mother. He deserved 1,000 times better than that. His first words in 18 months deserved better than that. Now, I told you at the start that this is not a fairy tale, and I meant it. But the honest truth of what happened is so much better than any fairy tale could ever have been. Adeline Frost found me 3 days later. Not at a gala, and not in some glittering boardroom. She came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, and she stood and waited at my bus stop on Maple Street, right near the dog's yard as it happened, dressed in plain jeans with no entourage and no assistants and no driver, and she waited patiently in the cold for me to finish out my afternoon route. And when I'd parked and stepped down, she did not lead with the vow. She did not lead with the money or the gala or any single piece of all that noise. She led with this quietly. "Thank you. for not taking the thing that every single person in that room wanted you to take. Every other man alive would have taken it. You are the very first man in 2 years who looked at my son and did not instantly see a way to use him to get to me. And so we talked. Just talked, the two of us, standing there by the side of an ordinary road, while a big old golden retriever watched us the whole time through the slats of his fence. She told me about her husband, and about the long siege of the last 2 years, and about how staggeringly alone a person can be standing in the very middle of all that money. And I told her about Lily, and about Route 12, and about how you learn, after enough years, to read a child's entire day right off their face. We did not talk about the vow at all, not once. We just talked like two tired single parents standing at a bus stop, which, when you strip away every other thing, is exactly and completely what the both of us actually were underneath it all. I'm going to be very careful with you here, because this next part is the true heart of it, and I refuse to cheapen it. I did not fall for Adeline Frost because she was rich. God knows the money was nothing in the world but a complication, a great looming obstacle that kept me certain, for months and months, that the wisest and most decent thing I could possibly do was to keep my distance from that woman entirely, because the very last thing I would ever want to do on this earth was to prove that laughing ballroom right about me. And she, for her part, most certainly did not fall for me, because I was some noble, humble, salt-of-the-earth poor man. She would have seen straight through that in a heartbeat, and frankly, it would have disgusted her, and me too. No, what actually happened between us was so much slower, and so much quieter, and so much realer than any of that. It was two people who had each been worn right down to the bone by their own private griefs, who slowly discovered that they could simply sit together and be two ordinary human beings, with a quiet little boy between them who had, in his own way, already chosen the both of us. Sam was the matchmaker, but not in the way that whole ballroom thought he was. He did not choose me for his mother. He chose me for himself. And his mother, watching very closely over the weeks and months that followed how a man treated her precious son when there was supposedly absolutely nothing in it for him, she slowly chose me too, entirely on her own, in her own time, for her own good reasons, and that is the only possible order in which it could ever have happened and still been something real. We took it slow, months and months of slow. For Sam's sake, far more than for our own, honestly. I would not, under any circumstances, let that little boy get himself attached to a thing that might still fall apart and break his heart all over again. We married a year and a half later. Small. In a backyard, on a bright afternoon. And Sam talked the entire day, start to finish. Turns out that once that particular dam had finally broken, that boy had a solid year and a half of saved-up words just waiting to come pouring out, and they have not really stopped since. My Lily was the flower girl, beaming. And there was a golden retriever there, too, of course there was. We'd gotten Sam a dog of his own by then, a big, goofy rescue, and Sam had named him Maple, after the street where the whole thing started. And here's the thing I keep coming back around to, the thing I turn over and over. Every single person in that ballroom that night believed the story they were watching was the lucky bus driver who got himself chosen by a billionaire's little boy and won the whole lottery in one night. But that was never the story. Not even close. The real story is that a grieving little boy spent a year and a half of his short life completely silent because the entire world around him kept anxiously trying to fix him. And the one single person who simply saw him instead, who just slowed the bus down for the dog and said good morning and meant it, and asked for absolutely nothing back, that turned out to be the one person on earth that his battered little heart finally reached for, in a room packed full of people who looked a great deal more impressive than I ever will. Children are the very best lie detectors that God ever made. Sam did not reach past all those millionaires by accident or at random. He reached straight past every one of them because he had spent 18 long months with nothing to do but quietly watch them all perform. And he knew, the bone-deep way that only a child can truly know a thing, that not one single one of them had ever actually seen him. And I had. That is the whole of it. That is the only thing I ever did that any of them didn't. I saw him. I still drive Route 12 to this very day, People ask me why on earth I still do it. I surely don't need the paycheck anymore, I suppose, not now. But I think about all those other kids climbing up my steps every single morning. Every one of them carrying around things that are far too heavy for their small shoulders. And I think about how most of them have got somebody in their lives anxiously trying to fix them, and nowhere near enough people who are simply willing to see them. And I think to myself, this might just be the single most important job that I could possibly have. I get to be the man who says, "Good morning, good to see you," and genuinely means every word of it to 40 kids a day, in that fragile half-second before the great big world gets its hands on them for the day. Sam taught me that that is not a small thing to be able to do for a child. In fact, I have come to believe it just might be the biggest thing there is. I make a decent living. I will never be rich in the way that that ballroom full of people understood the word rich. And the strange truth is that I married into more money than I will ever know what to do with, and it has changed precisely nothing about who I am, or about the fact that I still climb into that bus every single morning. There is a version of that gala night where I take the prize, where I just smile and step forward and let 300 delighted people write me right into their fairy tale on the spot. And maybe, who knows, maybe it even works out fine in the end, but there is no version of that night where I do that, and also still get to kneel down, look that brave little boy square in the eye, and know all the way down in my gut that I protected the single bravest thing he ever did from being turned into a cheap joke about his mother. I chose the boy over the fairy tale, and in the very end, it turned out the boy was how I got the whole family anyway. Funny, the way that works out sometimes. You do the genuinely right thing by a child, fully expecting nothing at all to come of it. And it turns out to be the exact thing that hands you everything. That night, the night of the gala itself, before any of the rest of this had even begun to happen, I got home, and my Lily was still up past her bedtime, and she asked me how the big fancy party had been. And I told her it had been really something. And she asked me if anything interesting had happened there. And I stood in our kitchen, and I thought about a silent little boy crossing an enormous ballroom floor all by himself. And I said, "Yeah, baby, the bravest kid I know used his words tonight." It was the best thing I ever saw. She didn't understand what I meant by that. Not then, and that is perfectly all right. She's got herself a stepbrother now who talks her ear clean off every single day, and a goofy dog named Maple, so I do think she understands it just fine, in her own way, these days. So, let me ask you just one thing before you go. A whole entire ballroom full of powerful, important people could not manage to see one bus driver standing right in front of them, and a silent 6-year-old boy crossed that whole enormous room, past every last one of them, just to take his hand, because that bus driver had turned out to be the one single person who had ever just truly seen him and asked for nothing at all in return. So, here's what I honestly want to know from you tonight. Who is the person in your own life who saw you? Really, truly saw you? Back when you felt completely invisible to everybody else in the world. And have you ever once told them what it meant to you? Tell me about them down in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and I would truly love to know. And if this story got to you tonight, if you believe, the way that I have come to believe it, right down to the ground, that the realest and the rarest thing one person can ever do for another is simply to see them, and to ask for nothing in return, then do me that one small favor. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. Drop a like so that the next person can find their way here too. Leave your own story down in the comments, and I will see you in the very next one. Trust me, it's a good one.